the BRICS nations are supposedly set to announce to the world their new currency, which he anticipates to be backed by gold, as we've talked about, the only other tier one reserve asset. He expects them to make that announcement August 22nd at the BRICS meeting in Johannesburg. So these things are rapidly coming to a head. And I think it's something people need to be cognitively aware of because the world's about to change.
In this thought-provoking video, Andy Schectman delves into the imminent announcement from BRICS nations regarding their new currency, expected to be backed by gold, set to take place on August 22nd during the BRICS meeting in Johannesburg. This currency shift has significant implications for the world's financial landscape. Andy highlights the reasons behind banks' persistent troubles and how external factors like dedolarization are influencing the scenario. Moreover, the video explores the controversial weaponization of the dollar, pushing other nations to consider breaking free from the Western system in favor of BRICS' alternative.
Are supposedly set to announce to the world their new currency, which he anticipates to be backed by gold, as we've talked about, the only other tier one reserve asset. He expects them to make that announcement August 22nd at the BRICS meeting in Johannesburg. So these things are rapidly coming to a head. And I think it's something people need to be cognitively aware of because the world's about to change. You know, I see a confluence of events that are coming together at the same time. And, you know, I think it's very important to acknowledge the fact that the reasons behind the banks running into trouble have not gone away. And at the same time, you could argue that the forces outside the country, the continued de-dollarization and the bombshell announcement made by your friend Jim Rickards a couple of weeks ago, something we've been following and talking about between you and I for a very long time, that being the BRICS nations are supposedly set to announce to the world their new currency, which he anticipates to be backed by gold, as we've talked about, the only other tier one reserve asset. Expects them to make that announcement August 22nd at the BRICS meeting in Johannesburg. So these things are rapidly coming to a head. And I think it's something people need to be cognitively aware of because the world's about to change. To me, if you are the world reserve currency, you're supposed to remain neutral as it pertains to world events and the usage of the dollar. You can have your own views, but if you are the administrator of the world reserve currency as it pertains to who can and who cannot use the dollar, really, in my opinion, should not be up to anyone for that matter, especially the people that are administrating the currency, because what it does is it creates favorites in the minds of many, and it also creates anxiety. And it by kicking Russia out of SWIFT, by saying to them, you can no longer use the SWIFT system, which is the oxygen needed in order for money to transfer around the globe. And worse yet, sanctioning and, in essence, confiscating their assets, using them to rebuild the Ukraine. We have created an environment where instead of just being the administrators in an impartial manner of the world reserve currency, now we are telling the world who can and who cannot use it. And I think that has created the incentive for many, many other countries around the world to strongly consider breaking free from the Western system and taking a look at what the BRICS have to offer.
So they're weaponizing the dollar. They use it against Russia. They try to crush Russia's economy.
Correct.
And also, Biden did something to Saudi Arabia. What did he do to them?
Well, he alienated them. He told them that we were going green. And as a result, on top of signing a contract, as we've talked about, a military agreement with Russia, they have joined the BRICS. They have
Saudi Arabia joined Russia. The reason that's important, because what Andy talks about in 1974, the U.S. dollar became the petrodollar. Since the dollar was no longer backed by gold, because Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard in 81. They made the dollar backed by oil. That's why it's called the petrodollar. That was 74, I believe. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And it was the protection of the Saudi kingdom that, by extension, gave the dollar its hegemony. You protect us, and OPEC and the rest of us, or Saudi Arabia and the rest of the OPEC community will value and price oil exclusively in dollars, pushing away the one entity, that being Saudi Arabia, that gives the dollar its unique standing in the globe, on the globe, telling them that we don't need them anymore. We are going green. By 2030, we're going to start making strong strides in going green. And so we are pushing them away from wanting to continue to price oil in dollars. I think it's very important to understand one quick thing. If you look at his number one chief economic advisor, it's a man named Jared Bernstein, whose whole philosophy is relinquishing the world reserve status of the US dollar. He's the head economic advisor to the Biden administration. And in a report he wrote in 2014 called Dethrone King Dollar in the New York Times, he says that the distortions and trade imbalances created by being the world reserve currency should be relinquished immediately. So you have to ask yourself, is this a coincidence? I'm not sure. But the question is, why would you do this? And I think that, boils down to me to one simple equation. According to the 2022 balance sheet of the United States government, the assets that we have are $5 trillion. That's it, $5 trillion, of which 42.3% of the assets that the United States government holds, 42%, is student debt. And on top of that, we have 151 trillion in liabilities. 41% of the assets of the land of the free represents 41% of all the assets of this country is on the backs of our children. And that's 5 trillion in assets backing 151 trillion in liabilities. And so the question becomes, how do you pay that off?
It's not possible.
And, you made a comment earlier about it being Saudi Arabia's fault, but there was a time when they kept saying inflation was Putin's fault. But from where I come from and what I've studied in Austrian economics tells me that every time you see inflation throughout history, it's an increase in the money supply. And that's exactly what we have done over the last several years, printed more money than in the history of the country preceding it, creating these problems, these distortions. The question is, how do you ever print yourself out? How do you get out of 151 trillion in debt with 5 trillion in assets?
Andy, how long is a trillion seconds?
31,688 years ago.
Say it again.
31,680. You got Neanderthals walking the plains of Europe a trillion seconds ago, and we are 151 trillion in debt. Yes, dollars. And so the question becomes, going back to this reset, how much of this is intended when the top economic advisor to the administration advocates this? And the two things that you could do if you wanted to lose the reserve status, the only two things you need to do: push Saudi Arabia away, weaponize the dollar, make everyone think, are we next? If we don't fall in line with what they want, are they going to take our stuff? What do people say backs the dollar's value? Forget about oil. It's the full faith and credit in the U.S. system. Well, in terms of credit, we are insolvent and broke. We're $145 trillion in the hole compared to assets versus liabilities. And in terms of faith, I'll just simply say, how many people trust this country just simply upon looking at the way justice is perhaps not equally distributed, just looking at our current and previous administration, without even going down that hole? The world notices this. And, there are a lot of people who have come to this country seeking a better life, largely because they believe that you have a justice system that looks at everyone equally and opportunities for success. And I think that really, when you talk about trust, and you talk about trust of the West versus what the BRICS are trying to do, I'll just simply say this. If Jim Rickards is right, and I believe he is, I've been saying it for 3 years, and they issue a gold-backed currency and use the distributed ledger technology that the Chinese have mastered over 4 or 5 years. So you show what every country that has signed up for the BRICS is going to peg to the blockchain. And if you do it right and have it audited by independent auditors, you now have trust. And in other words, trust is not in our past, it's not in our words, it's not in any of this. Trust in terms of the BRICS, maybe people don't trust China and Russia so much, but trust is gold and immutability of a blockchain. And if you have it independently audited, you immediately have gained a large portion of the world's trust in a system that is sorely lacking trust these days when we look westward to us.